So hops is a plant estrogen, and when men take hops, they're getting estrogen. For women, hops is good for estrogen when they're going towards more of a menopausal issue in their life. To help regulate hormonal function, hops can be very helpful, but not necessarily every day unless there's some kind of issue. Facebook is talking. So with men, it's not recommended to work with hops very often because what's happening is there's either testosterone or estrogen in the body. And when you're constantly consuming estrogen sources, they're phytoestrogens, so they mimic estrogen and they cause the body to produce its own estrogen. Wild yam is another source, so hops are another source. And of course, if repeated use of phytoestrogens causes an estrogen spike, right, which will actually lower testosterone levels, so we need to be careful when we're dealing with hormonal transforming. These are usually generally when we deal with hormone work, we deal with kind of acute conditions that may be 2 to 6 weeks, and we work at a proper dosage, and then we generally want to stop for some time. Not necessarily recommended unless maybe a woman has irregular menstruation, etc. And don't forget, so is hops for 6 years or birth control pills for 6 years? It's always very interesting to try to cross-reference whatever we're going to do herbally against what the mainstream methodology might be, and really kind of cross-compare those things. So hops is something that people should be a little careful about and really only work with, not necessarily as a daily tea. Now, the funny thing is, most of you probably know what is the main ingredient in most beer is hops, right? So we're talking about increasing estrogen levels. Well, isn't it an interesting coincidence that men predominantly drink beer that is hoppy beer, which, of course, Stephen Harrod Buhner has a book called Herbal Healing Brews, and he talks about or I don't know where the idea comes from because I didn't find it in his book, but basically he's attributed to this idea that like the church wanted to kind of mellow out all the grumpy boys who would fight against the establishment, and so therefore before that were a lot of psychoactive and psychotropic beers, such as Hembane is one of the famous ones, and they would actually get people into visionary states. And of course the church was the primary head of beer making, and somewhere along the lines they decided there were only a few plants that were allowed to be used, hops being one of the main ones. Now, it's phytoestrogenic, so it actually will increase estrogen in males and actually reduce testosterone in males. So very interesting to be mindful of. Does anybody else have any questions? Biliana has a question. Hello, Biliana. 2 questions. When is best to plant nettle and burdock from seed, and the best times to harvest them? Well, basically, burdock is what's called a biennial, so that means it has a 2-year season. The best time to harvest the burdock roots is in the first year in the fall. So you can definitely plant burdock in the springtime and then harvest in the fall. And they're nice, succulent, beautiful, tender roots. Of course, we know burdock is also called gobo. It's also called cardoon in Italian. And burdock is a really great kidney and liver tonic. So a really great herb to juice, to make tea from, to eat as a wonderful vegetable. But if you're going to eat wild burdock as a vegetable, it's highly recommended that you discern between what's a first year and a second year root, because the second year roots are going to be very hard and woody. Burdock was a staple for indigenous people. Consider that burdock is a source of carbs, carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are very hard to grow. Most of monocropping comes from the need for carbohydrates because it's very hard to wild harvest enough carbs to sustain ourselves. Especially in this day and age of so much toxicity, there's things like cattails would be a carbohydrate source, but they're usually in water that's not clean. Another source of carbohydrates in the wild would be wild yam, which of course then has phytoestrogenic aspects, so we need to be mindful of that. And the other one was Apios americana, which is a huge, beautiful tuberous root, which would replace potatoes in our country, and people would have a wild source of carbohydrate. Apparently they're delicious. I've only found them wild a few times, so I haven't harvested too many. There's a lot of people growing Apios americana and working with those plants to try to get them into more cultivation. So then stinging nettle, the same is true. If you have seeds, you could plant seeds now. Now's a great time to plant stinging nettle seeds, and you'll start to see them by the fall. Then the next spring following would be your first harvest if you want young shoots, or you let them grow up and then pick the leaves off of that. And of course the stinging nettle seeds are wonderful as well and a great source of protein. So literally quinoa, flax, chia, all those kind of seed grains that we're getting used to could easily be replaced by stinging nettle, which grows like mad and also keeps your neighbors out. And of course the stinger of stinging nettle is called urtication, to actually urticate yourself. And this is a great way to perform self-acupuncture, essentially. And what you're doing is you're actually increasing blood flow to that area. And as I mentioned before, when you increase blood flow to an area, you also bring all the herbal chemistry that you've been consuming, all the food chemistry that you've been consuming, all the minerals and vitamins needed to restore and re-heal that part of the body. So hope that helps, Biljana. And if you have any further questions, let me know. Let's see, the lavender question. So Meadow is asking about lavender sources. And so we know lavender as this calming, wonderful, healing herb. Let me get to those questions. Okay, her question is, I've been reading a lot about lavender and was wondering what flowers are local to New Jersey that would have similar healing properties, such as antidepressant or to relax or sleep. So lavender is an easy growable plant. Anybody can be growing lavender, so it's not like it has to stay as this exotic herb. You can grow lavender in a pot, you can grow lavender anywhere. It basically likes to grow anywhere that it will. So if you don't have a pot of lavender, some alternatives in New Jersey specifically, or the Northeast, to relaxing sleeping. You can find St. John's wort, but I recommend being careful. It's kind of becoming more and more rare. It's hard for me to find in New Jersey, although you go to upstate New York and there's tons of it. In Jersey it's very difficult. Another one is mugwort, which is one of my favorites, which is a real dreaming and sleeping herb. Also, can be quite stimulating at the same time. So be mindful how you work with those plants and if they relax you or put you to sleep. Also, chamomile is another one which you can't necessarily find wild, but you can find other species in the same genus as chamomile, and those are around. So oxeye daisy is one of those. So I'm not familiar with oxeye daisy as a relaxant, but it has that kind of relaxing smell. So let's see, all I have to do is look around on my apothecary's shelf. Catnip is another great one. So it's easy to grow catnip. You can also find it wild. Lemon balm is another great one. So these are also very easy to either grow or on occasion find, but definitely try to work with mugwort, see how that works. Usually is pretty helpful for sleep. You can actually burn some, and you can smudge your room before going to sleep, and you'll have deep mystical, and sometimes lucid dreams. But if you don't want all that, it's easy to harvest some chamomile from a friend or catnip. If you know anybody who grows catnip, it goes crazy. So the more people who harvest catnip, the better. There's always too much catnip if you have a catnip plant. So then someone else asked about patchouli growing and making oils, and this is a really interesting question. And also, David was mentioning this, and we were talking about this a little bit. So the thing with making oils is there's basically three kinds of oil with plants. So you have a distilled oil, you have, which is an essential oil, right? You have a pressed oil, which is usually a fat source like olive oil. And you also have the ability to take one of those fat sources like olive oil, and you have the ability to steep it in an herb, steep an herb inside of that olive oil, and you make what's called generally an infused oil. So an infused oil is very different from a distilled oil. And distilled oils, we know all these essential oils. So what we need to first do is discern between those. So it's very easy to make an infused oil at home, and all you need to do is put a dried herb inside of something like olive oil, and you just shake it every day with a jar on it, and in about 10 to 30 days you'll have an infused oil. You just strain it out from there, squeeze it as hard as you can, get all that oil out, and then you have an infused oil. Those are really great for topical use. You can also eat them, and they're just a wonderful thing. Definitely increase the amount of massages you will get by having some St. John's wort infused oil or anything like that. Lavender, rosemary, any of the spices you could always infuse. Now, to deal with an essential oil and sort of DIY essential oils, what people don't realize is that in a bottle of essential oil, let's see, such as this one, there's a lot of plant matter in that. Part of our complaint about monocropping and sort of having large masses of one plant is definitely present in essential oil production. So large-scale companies of essential oils are definitely getting monocropped fields going. So, all those few milliliters of, say, lavender oil takes, something like thousands of plants to get that much essential oil out of them. So on the sustainability factor, essential oils are not very ecologically sustainable. However, again, cross-referencing towards pharmaceutical production, we probably would rather have, right now in our society, we'd probably rather have monocrops of lavender grown in wherever, Guam, Tahiti, something like that, where these herb sources are getting essential oils, than massive pharmaceutical production which have an expiration date and then are getting thrown into the garbage and essentially are not decomposing in the ecosystem and are being cycled through. For more info on that, check out Stephen Buhner's book called Lost Language of Plants. It's very amazing to see. He tracks the systemic kind of application of pharmaceutical, synthetic pharmaceutical chemicals throughout the ecosystem. So it's profound to kind of get that perspective. Now, essential oils are really great for times when herbs don't work and times with deeper issues. So I recommend using them sparingly and working with them carefully. If you did want to make some at home, one of the ideas I talked about with my friends is you can either make a DIY distiller by taking a big pot, right, and you put water at the bottom of the pot, and if you put a bowl above that and you put ice on that bowl, you have a little cup in the center in the water, and you put the herbs around that cup in the pot. You put the heat on, this is on the stove, and you actually cook those herbs. And what happens is that the herbs those essential oils are always volatile. So what that means is that with heat, they rise up into the air. So since you have that bowl and you have it full of ice, you get condensation, right? So this is evaporation, and it hits the bowl, and condensation, and it centers into the bowl and drops into your cup if you position everything right and if your bowl is convex enough. So this is one way of making your own. It's more like a hydrosol than an essential oil. right? So that's you can look at some DIY methods of hydrosols online. There's also, then you can buy a distiller, and those cost, $500 to $1,000, and you pack those. You have to pack those with so much fresh herb to get just a few milliliters of oil, and then your mind will be blown towards mass production of essential oils. That's what woke me up to realizing how much herbs it takes. So what you can do, though, is if you do your own distillations and you have your own steam distillation methods, you can actually get what's called a hydrosol out of that, and that's generally what's more practical for home use. So you can get a rosemary hydrosol out of the herbs in your backyard, the rosemary herbs in your backyard, and that's a really great way of applying rosemary. Basically, it captures it's distillation, so it captures the distillate, which is really only essential oils out of a plant. The problem is that plants have many things: terpenes, resins, alkaloids. All of those things stay in the plant body. So the reason they're called essential oils is because you're pulling out the essence, what's almost known as the spirit. And this is an alchemical practice. So distillation was discovered by the alchemists, and it's an alchemical art to pull the spirit from the body of the plant. The problem with that is, if you stay on that metaphor, then you understand, well, it seems most practical that the plant body will help heal my body. The plant spirit will help heal my spirit. So what I need and what I would like is a holistic herb so that it can help me with all the levels of my being. So that is patchouli time and lavender time. Also, it's really great before sleep if you are experiencing lack of sleep. I recommend, what I find works for me is that a half tablespoon or a half teaspoon of ashwagandha powder into a little bit of water, hot water or milk, before going to sleep, and you drink that down. That's really helpful in restoring the sleep cycles and getting restorative sleep, or drinking anything from chamomile, anything like that. But you can also take an oil such as almond oil and massage your scalp and massage your feet, and you'll definitely have better sleep if you do that. So feel free to keep the questions coming. There's a few more. Let me organize some of this here. Also, feel free to ask questions. Mugwort, thank you. You're welcome, Meadow. Let's see what's here. Feel free to ask questions. So, we also have a question about natural sources of vitamin E. So vitamin E is one of those things that somehow got coerced into becoming a pill, and whenever we know that there's just these pills, it's kind of like resveratrol. You should always ask and try to do a little research as to where these things are coming from. So with vitamin E is a really easy to get food that basically is in fatty vegetables. So we all know avocados are a great source of vitamin E. So you can even put avocados all over your face, and that's actually a great skin cream. So you just put out all of the beauty creams. They're all out of business from smushing avocado on your face. So vitamin E is definitely found easily in the plant world, usually in seeds. So when you're eating anything from flax seeds to chia seeds, to avocados, you're getting lots and lots of vitamin E. So be careful of the pill pushing. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to ask. There's like 5 sources of potential question places, so I apologize. And thank you. So David was also asking about fermentation, and you know, I think next time we do this, it would be nice to just run down a quick fermentation aspect. It would be really easy to show you all how to make your own ferments, because I get a lot of questions on that. A lot of questions. And basically, since I've been teaching fermentation, what I realize about fermentation is it's like the icky art. It's something that we're afraid of and we don't know if we're going to hurt ourselves with. But generally, it's almost impossible. Like Sandor Katz said this statistic that, food poisoning, there's been 0 cases of food poisoning due to homemade fermented foods. And of course, reverse that into the culture we live in. There's tons and tons and tons of food poisoning going on at restaurants. So the chances of getting food poisoning from a restaurant are actually incredibly much higher than getting food poisoning from making your own ferment at home, which to this record, to this day, are 0 cases according to the FDA. Sandor Katz looked into it. Check out his book, The Art of Fermentation or Wild Fermentation. Those are great books. I also have some videos on YouTube as when I did a class at NOFA, Northeast Organic Farmers Association. I did their winter conference and I recorded that, so that's going up on YouTube. You can check that out at Return to Nature Scales. It's a lot to say, and these are good things. So getting some more questions. Let's see here. GABA. So, basically the lowdown is I really tend to avoid anything that's extracted beyond plants. So, someone's asking about GABA, GABA, what's blah blah blah, linoleic acid, something like that. And I really have no experience using those. I know that those are very important for helping sleep rhythms. But just like melatonin, a lot of people tell me that melatonin gives them crazy nightmares. What the issue is with these kind of things that are something like nutraceuticals, we can call them, what they seem to be doing is creating external dependence, and we have to be mindful that if you're giving yourself external, often synthetic versions of a chemical, your body in essence is saying, oh, okay, you got that for me, no need to produce that. So most extreme of this is for SSRIs, or serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These antidepressant things, it's actually shown that people who take those for long periods of time actually have more trouble producing their own endogenous serotonin. So whenever we're working with these things, it's really important. And if we do have issues of insomnia or sleep problems, it's really important to get to the underlying cause. I know the society that we live in just says, well, if you take this, if you spend enough money, you'll sleep better. But also, I don't sleep because I have stress in my mind, and if I deal with that stress, I generally will sleep better. I know that in this world, it seems like there are infinite amounts of excuses to not slow down, to not meditate, to not breathe, to not take a hot bath. But what we're going to find in this culture as we continue in the next 15 or 20 years, that no amount of productivity is worth my health. So taking that hot bath once a week, it doesn't matter what you're going to achieve in those 45 minutes. Sanity and proper sleep and happiness are the more important principles than productivity, even than keeping a job. Because if I'm miserable and I have a job, my happiness is more important. I know it sounds crazy, but what have you got to lose? So let's see. So Kim Carter says that she wants to start a foraging group, and how would she go about this? Cool question. One of the things you can do is use an online method, such as using meetup.com. Unfortunately, they make you pay a little bit, but it's not so bad if you charge $5 per person, or something like that. The other one is you can start a Facebook group, and this is free, and a lot of people do that. So you can also start by searching your location. I know Michael Weiss, a friend of mine on Facebook, he's got a Maryland Foragers group. So, for people who live in Maryland, there's a lot of people that probably have no idea that you can find a specific Maryland foraging group. So you can always start one of those on Facebook. And the thing is, usually with that, you have to wait a while and you have to kind of fish things out. So you can do any of that. And obviously, if you live anywhere in the location that I'm in, what I've been doing is working really hard to start my own foraging group. After years and years of getting people out to classes, now there's kind of a community around it. So, hard, honest work building community is never easy, but is always rewarding. Let's see. Gabba gabba hey. So what I can do here, just as an experiment, right? So natural sources of GABA are foods rich in complex carbohydrates such as whole grains, brown rice, and oats. Okay, great. Eat oats. Soak oats and eat them. Oats are incredibly nourishing for the nervous system and really help to restore the nervous system. So these are kind of easy options. Also, bananas, beef liver, and other organ meats, broccoli, citrus fruits, halibut, lentils, molasses, and nuts. So I would always go for trying to really get doses of food-based supplements into my diet. And sort of, if I had a sleeping issue and I felt like GABA was really helping me, what I would do is kind of switch my diet onto lots of varied amounts of that. Especially eat like oats, a couple hours before bed. And it's funny because we all know what it feels like to eat a lot of carbs and you start to get sluggish and tired. Well, what a great thing to do for dinner if indeed you are having trouble sleeping. Let's see what we got here. This is really fun. I have no idea who's watching. So Emma asks, what helps us communicate with plants better? This is a great question. And basically, if anybody wants to communicate with plants, what's most important is that they slow down and take time. Just like getting to know a dog, it takes a certain level of changing, or let's say even a wild animal. If you wanted to befriend a squirrel to come jump on your shoulder, it would take quite an amount of effort towards slowing down, looking non-intimidating, being relaxed, showing through body language that we don't mean harm. So in essence, the same thing is true with plants. If we want to communicate with plants better, we have to show them first that we're willing to listen and that we're willing to slow down. So one of the easy practices is go on a plant sit. Go for a walk, follow your childlike wonder. Find a plant that sticks out or is glowing and shining for no reason at all. And just take time to sit with that plant and just stare at it and just be with it. And once it knows that you have a certain dedication to learning, it will begin to speak to you. That doesn't mean it will say, hey Dan, this is me and this is what I am and blah blah. That is limited to our forced imposition of what communication is supposed to be. It's always funny how people say, oh, well, monkeys are the first people to develop communication. No, we're not. We're the first people to put communication into mouth sounds. Blah, 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 blah. But everything else in nature is communicating, and generally plants communicate through chemistry. So the more scientists discover this stuff, the more perplexed they get, and the more it turns into more like mysticism. In essence, the plants are mediating everything around them and feeling everything around them through chemistry. Mycelium feels every footstep that you make as a Homo sapien everywhere you go that's forested. So this sort of response mechanism is built into the entire system, or else it wouldn't exist. Plants, mushrooms, animals are always responding to everything that is happening. So if we realize that, then we have to kind of slow down to become less intimidating and less abrasive. So generally you won't really stop to hear plants communicating with you if you rip through the forest on a BMX bike doing backflips, although that might be fun and it might be good exercise, the plant will require a different level of communication and a different level of engagement. So these are all basic ideas of working with plants, and if you have any more specific questions on that, just let me know. I'm going to get some water real quick. So, Katya asks, are there vegan sources of vitamin B12? And this is a pretty intense and loaded question, in a way, because what we find is that actually there are sources of B12, such as in seaweed, such as in nutritional yeast. These are sources of vitamin B12. Also, they actually found vitamin B12 being secreted from the colon. The bacteria in the colon are actually secreting vitamin B12. But that brings an issue. If the colon is secreting vitamin B12, then wouldn't it just naturally be absorbing in that place? So then we wouldn't necessarily need external sources of vitamin B12 if that was the case. Now that brings up the issue that kind of the non-vegan or the meat-eating community is bringing up to the table, is that is it actually bioavailable? So, vitamins that are not bioavailable, that are not actually accessible through the ecosystem, are not going to be very helpful. So we need to understand, are they bioavailable vitamins or are they non-bioavailable? So there are vegan sources of vitamin B12, but there's debate. And if you start looking into the literature, you will find, if you are really honest with what you read, you will find that everything is contradicting everything. So with that said, I think my method is always, be mindful of what the body needs and make sure that I do not try to overpower my body with a certain philosophy or idea that I am not really listening to my body about. It's my easy way out. I've noticed that when I wave hello at trees, they also wave back, Emma. And when I stand in tree pose, they stand in tree pose much longer than I do. They're kind of the masters. Let's see, are there any more questions out there? So, if anybody doesn't have any more questions, then we might call it for the night. So this is really fun. I really appreciate the time and opportunity to be able to do this, and really appreciate and honor all of you. And this is really the first steps to something that can really revolutionize how we treat the education of future generations. This is an experiment of opening up alternative education. This is totally possible to replace our children's education with new models. So very, very important to recognize. So what I'm attempting to do is build a return to nature school that has no physical location, but is actually not boundaried by physicality. One of the things that I didn't really appreciate in school is how much I had to sit in a classroom, right? So it's great, the idea that we can just make school everywhere. Yay! So if anybody is not familiar, you can check out my website at returntonature.us. A lot of classes, a lot of articles up there, a lot of workshops coming up. I'm doing a mentorship program. That's already started, so I'm really excited about that. And I'm also going to try to do one in Brooklyn. So if you live in the Brooklyn area, or if you know people in the Brooklyn area, spread the word about that. And some more questions are coming in. So somebody's asking about known medicinal qualities of nasturtium. Nasturtium is a really cool plant, and there are basically the flowers, the leaves, and the pods. So the first thing about it is that the entire nasturtium is edible, but really, really spicy. So nasturtium flowers are like fire. The leaves are less intense, and also the seeds are known as poor man's capers. So you can actually ferment the pods of nasturtium, and this is one of those greens that actually you can grow a lot of and actually eat as a salad instead of a beautiful flower. Works as a beautiful flower too, but you can harvest the greens at any time and eat them. And of course, what you have with nasturtium is you have this sort of fire sense, right? So whenever we're dealing with the ability of understanding constitution principles, right, we have the idea that heat will always stimulate the digestive system, right? It will also burn viruses, right? Bacteria. It will increase heat in the body. Therefore, it's detoxifying. But if you had an issue such as high blood pressure or too much heat in your body in any way, it would actually be contraindicated. So this is one way of always trying to understand our own intuitive sense of herbalism is what is happening on my tongue, what is happening in my mouth, and what kind of principles can I draw out of that. So whenever you have heat, right, would be good for cold conditions. So what is a cold condition? Anything from anemia is like a cold condition in the sense of your fingers are always cold. Yes, you need more iron, but you can also do things like cayenne or nasturtium, and it will increase heat to the body. So looking at the heating value of nasturtium is a good way into understanding some of the herbal properties of nasturtium. But really great green. Eat it lots and grow it lots. Let's see what we got. There is another question somewhere in the matrix. So Jessica asks, I have an inquiry about milkweed, not a specific question, but can you expand on it? So milkweed is now getting popular because people are saying the monarchs are dying, plant more milkweed, and there's definitely truth in that. And so it's very important to understand that monarchs like milkweed, but the weird thing is they don't really like the food milkweed. So these are two plants. Let's see, what's that other one called? This is so fun because I could just Google things. How ridiculous. Pleurisy root is also what it's called, and Asclepias tuberosa. And pleurisy root was a really popular herb for pleurisy, which is actually fluid in the lungs, heavy mucus in the lungs, but it's a very endangered plant. And it's very hard to find, and it used to grow all over the place. The root is used, so obviously you kill the plant. Pleurisy root is also, I think, called butterfly bush or butterfly weed, one of those kind of plants, something like that. And basically it's one of those plants that has a little bit of toxicity if you have too much. So one needs to always be careful with the milkweed family. Now, the other milkweed, so this pleurisy root is actually the plant that monarchs go to. So when you see this stuff about plant milkweed, I'm not sure they mean the milkweed that we're all familiar with, but they actually mean this Asclepias. So plant more pleurisy root, and then you'll have more monarch butterflies. So the other milkweed, often known as giant milkweed, so these are in the same genus, right? The genus is the general name, the species is the specific name. So take your last name, right? There are many of your last name, but there's only one you, unless your parents named you the same thing as your brother or sister, which would be pretty intense. So these are the Asclepius, right? Asclepius is the genus, and in those are several what are commonly known as milkweeds. So this is why botanists really dislike common names, because milkweed, we don't really know which species we're talking about. There are many different kinds. So giant milkweed, let's see what that one is. Giant, that's not giant milkweed. So here's a great article by Arthur Haynes that is called "Have You Eaten the Feather Shoe?", which is apparently one of the words in Passamaquoddy for it. And so this is Asclepius syriaca, which is common milkweed. This is the one that we're all pretty familiar with, the green one with the kind of oblong tear-shaped buds. So there's a whole bunch that can be talked about milkweed. There are edibility aspects to milkweed when it's a shoot, but it looks very similar to dogbane. So people should always be mindful when dealing with the young shoots of milkweed that it looks very similar to dogbane. It can be distinguished, but just that's something to be mindful of. Another aspect is the milkweed buds are also an edible wild food, as long as they're harvested before they turn into pulp feathers, right? They're this really feathery consistency after a while, and so you don't want to eat them then. Another aspect is you can actually eat the flower buds before they're open, and the flowers. Now the issue with this is that you're kind of stealing from pollinators and potentially monarch butterflies, so always be mindful to either sow the seeds you find or harvest carefully, because you want to, bunnies cannot go to the grocery store. We can, unfortunately and fortunately, so we need to be mindful of milkweed. So that's a little bit about milkweed. You can check out Arthur's article that I posted on Ustream, and it's pretty cool, pretty great wild food. So let's just see, make sure there's no further questions. So now we kind of have a format. If anybody's interested, basically Ustream costs a lot of money to buy an account, so that's why I haven't yet, because this is just an experiment. If more people are interested, I can definitely get an account, but then I need to make people pay some, because it costs me money and I don't have much of that stuff. So I'm totally down with that as things grow. If people are interested in this kind of thing, because it can really be cool, we can definitely continue a dialogue about foraging herbalism, and it's a really great way to teach and share with people who can't physically come to classes that I teach, but we can develop a deeper level of community resonance, and hopefully this can inspire you all to do your own online classes. All kinds of stuff is possible if we reach out and we connect in these ways. So it seems that all the questions are answered. So I thank you all. This will be on Ustream, available to listen to. If anybody is interested and appreciates this work, please feel free to donate through PayPal. You can donate through my email, which is dan@returntonature.us. Anything is welcome. All donations go to caring about people and sending them herbs and buying bulk food and starting sustainable community. I don't have very many lavish goals, other than I just want to live in a yurt in the middle of the woods and invite all of you over to it to do basically things like this. So that's what I'm basically working on. As was mentioned before, if anybody's interested in classes, articles, workshops, and lots of videos, my website is returntonature.us. Thank you all for joining. I appreciate you all. We'll do this every fourth Wednesday of the month, so we'll do another one come April. And thank you all for being part of our world premiere herbal question and answer with Dan.